Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you as always. And a pretty interesting set of stories. Very varietous set of stories. A lot of different angles being covered on the show. We start though in Washington, where the House January 6th committee is going to issue criminal referrals. Chairman Representative Betty Thompson has said, saying there is no decision made on who would be the subject of the referrals or what the charges would be, which I find pretty weird if they know they're already going to make them. Like, how does that even work? We'll break it down. We'll tell you. But we're also going to stick in Washington, break down this rail defeat over at the White House is where we're squarely going to be placing the blame. Luke Savage has the story in Jackman Magazine. Don't blame Republicans. Amtrak Joe Biden is the one who defeated the rail workers. Bernie Sanders is bringing the Yemen War Powers resolution he brought in the last term to the floor soon just next week, and revealing new evidence has exposed more Israeli culpability in the Shireen Abu Akleh killing that has led, among other things, the Al Jazeera network to take that case to the ICC to directly challenge the wrongdoings of the Israeli government. Got a great show for you guys today. Welcome to Newsflash. And we do start today, obviously, with the House January 6th committee, and it's kind of been somewhat of a interesting point of conversation, I'd say, among the people who kind of follow politics more religiously, because, in the lead up to the midterm elections, we've seen really so much about a lot of different things. We've seen a lot about inflation. We've seen a lot about gas prices. We heard a lot about all these reasons why Democrats are going to romp, and Republicans are going to romp, and Democrats, they kind of had, they didn't really sound too good. They always had this one feeble thing when they would talk to Republicans and say, hey, we're trying to make the case for their own future success. And, one of the things was, frankly, democracy. Democracy is on the ballot. You heard it so many times from so many different people. January 6th Commission, Donald Trump wrongdoing, that led to a real bounce in the polls this summer. It's, a lot of people care about it. It's motivating a lot of people, and the midterm results being what they were, I think, there's a lot of other things behind that. But, I think people, largely to a certain extent, have been definitely discounting this. I honestly, personally, am still inclined to, kind of discount people's feelings on January 6th, or the impact and the severity of people's feelings on January 6th. But we are now seeing, of course, criminal charges being conferred here, and I may be wrong because, look at the way the midterm elections results took their shape. It was really quite remarkable. So let's see what we got here. This is from Luke Broadwater of the New York Times. The House Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol will issue criminal referrals to the Justice Department based on its inquiry, the panel's chairman said on Tuesday, but has made no decision on who it will recommend charging or what offenses it will cite. Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, the Democratic chairman of the committee, told reporters on Capitol Hill the panel had agreed to take steps and would meet later Tuesday to discuss the specifics, but within moments, he and his staff rushed to clarify a statement reflecting a debate that is still underway within the panel about whether to call for charges against former President Donald J. Trump and some of his top allies. What we've decided is that we will probably make referrals, Thompson told reporters a short time later. So, I guess what I can kind of interpret from this is it kind of does seem like, to the most extent, that there is a legal case. There is a strong, it's not like, case to charge these people and get them in some serious kind of trouble here. But the greatest argument against it seems to be it is going to be too destabilizing. It's going to be too much of a problem for the, people's faith in government, the whole idea of, a smooth transition to power and democracy and all that, functioning fully, because, these are the democracy people after all, so you're going to have to keep it relatively orderly. So Thompson, who is known for his kind of big picture guidance about the investigation, but being at times less involved in the granular details of its work, then suggested the decision was no longer in question. There's a general agreement we will do some referrals, but we got to get there. We're not there yet. So it just seems like he may not also be the best spokesperson. This, I think, what New York Times is trying to imply here. A subcommittee of 4 lawyers on the committee, Liz Cheney, Jamie Raskin, Zoe Lofgren, and Adam Schiff, have all studied whether to issue criminal referrals to the Justice Department for Trump and others. And of course, it's not just the fact that they're lawyers, it's just going to be the fact that there's a lot of political considerations. Do we break this taboo? And I think there's something really important. It's a very interesting question as to, every president could have been charged with something, but no president has. And I think that is the answer to the question right in and of itself, was to, why is it so taboo to go after presidents? And I think the reason why they're going after Trump is because he is different. He is someone who is fundamentally excluded and different from every single other president. And just I feel like that so many people, in a way that was just unprecedented, I think really in American presidential history, he is just so outside of the norm that his crimes and his kind of crimes, I guess, in his disregard for the playing by the rules of the office really was, I think, his biggest crime in the end. Because people in that office had committed far worse crimes, and they're some of the most respected people to ever hold that office. So it's how you act, it's how you present yourself, and the fact that he presented himself that way, I think, separates him from the club, from the exclusive club of, we're all in this together. President's got to stick together. We're different because it's a president thing. If the kind of famous thing if you want to prosecute Trump, then there's many other presidents who've done similar crimes. Or if you want to prosecute Obama, then they're all war criminals. And just there is that element to it, and that is why presidents are essentially above the law. Pretty much for good after they become president. So, because of that, and because you set a precedent, and also it's just they are so supremely powerful, and it is just the two-tiered element of our justice system. Among the potential charges they have considered are conspiracy to defraud the United States, an obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress. A criminal referral carries no legal weight, but would be a symbolic act by the panel putting forth an official finding that it believes crimes were committed, even though Congress has no power to charge or prosecute them. So, again, this is something that even if they did it, it's not like it would be that much of a significant thing. This would, in the annals of history, just be a still relatively poorly remembered committee. It's not like it's going to make maybe a few legacies, but the legacies of people will not stretch. These people will not stretch, I think, very far or very wide. There's a lot more things that has to happen for this criminal referral to go to a real court and get these people actually charged and get them, behind bars. And for it to really have a history-altering, history-changing impact for these people to be gone after in a big way. But even though it's so symbolic, they still will not do it. They're still so afraid and still so nervous about doing the whole thing because it's so taboo. It's just so really against the norm. All right, let's go to our next story here. This is by Luke Savage in the Jacobin magazine. Last week, the self-described most pro-labor president in American history spearheaded an effort to prevent more than 100,000 workers employed on the country's railways from going on strike for better job conditions. That effort, supported by both senior Democratic leaders and most Republicans in the House and Senate, was successful. As a result, Congress has now imposed a contract on workers without any paid sick time. The demands of the unions evolved in a dispute. One of the major demands. This intervention was exactly what corporate America wanted, and as ever, corporate America got its way. Workers thus will continue to toil through shifts that can run as long as 80 hours, remaining unable to take time off in cases of emergency, with many expected to be on call for all or most of the day when not on the clock. It's an absolutely wretched and indefensible state of affairs. It's also the outcome that Joe Biden and other powerful Democrats wanted and actively sought. These are the basic and incontrovertible facts of last week's developments. But owing, among other things, to the particularly cynical line that has been taken by Democratic leaders, these facts are apparently being lost on some. In a sense, that's perfectly understandable. Most people, after all, have neither the time nor the inclination to follow the granular details of a particular story in Congress. And if you're an average news consumer who is generally inclined toward the Democratic Party, you're liable to have seen and or heard the following about recent events. First, that most Democrats in the House and Senate voted for rail workers to get 7 days of paid sick leave. And second, you would have heard that President Biden and other key Democrats support the rail workers' demand, and third, that all but a few Republicans in Congress voted against the idea. Each of these things is strictly true, but has been emphasized in various statements by figures like Biden. Workers will get paid sick days as soon as I convince Republicans to see the light. Outgoing House Leader Nancy Pelosi said, as we consider congressional action, we must recognize the railroads have been selling out to Wall Street to boost their bottom lines, making obscene profits while demanding more and more from railroad workers. And Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said the position of our administration is that every American worker ought to have paid sick leave. Faced with the facts, it's quite easy to see how a casual observer might conclude that the only obstacle to paid sick time faced with those facts, I should say, it's only really kind of easy to see how the average person might conclude the only obstacle, the major problem, would be the Republicans. Because, who else is standing in the way? Who else is causing any kind of, really a major, significant problem? It's just, but that is, I think, a kind of, as Luke Savage explains here, a bit deceiving. What this picture critically admits, however, is that it was Biden's White House that originally set last week's events in motion. On Monday, Biden's office released a statement calling on Congress to pass legislation to immediately adopt the tentative agreement between railroad workers and operators without any modifications or delay to avert a potentially crippling national shutdown, touting an historic 24% pay rise for rail workers, a raise in neglected dimension will be spread out over 5 years. The statement contained only a cursory acknowledgement of the issue of paid sick time. More to underscore its central point, it also included the following. Some in Congress want to modify the deal to either improve it for labor and or for management. However, well-intentioned, any changes would risk delay and a debilitating shutdown. The agreement was reached in good faith by both sides. So pretty much saying, don't try and change this. This agreement is what the agreement should be. We don't want to, we don't want to deal with this anymore. We just want to get this done, passed as is. And the White House thus initially opposed any attempt to include paid sick days in the contract it was hell-bent on imposing, facing a backlash. Nancy Pelosi soon announced that the dual votes, after dual votes took place on one, an imposition of the tentative agreement, and another, these are the two votes that took place last week, the TA agreement that was supported and the 7 days paid sick time that in the House was also supported. Pelosi did so knowing full well the latter would never get the necessary support to pass in the Senate. Had she and Biden actually been serious about trying to win rail workers their sick days, she could have refused to decouple the two issues and tried to rustle up the votes to avoid a strike and score victory for workers at the same time. That option, of course, might not have succeeded, even with a genuine threat of a nationwide rail strike. Republicans, and very likely many Democrats as well, could have refused to give any ground, thus compelling workers to go on strike. This underscores another important truth of all this, which is that Biden and the Democrats could have simply refrained from doing anything at all, instead hammered away the message that the railway company's refusal to grant basic dignity to workers was risking a disruptive shutdown only weeks before Christmas. So to actually take the side for once, for the first time since the New Deal, actually having the government take the side of workers in a dispute against management, and especially in a key industry that has been basically run to the ground. Like, this is not a situation where, the railway workers have it particularly high on the hog. They're living well. They're just trying to ask for, some better conditions around the edges here and there. No. Like, they're, systematically getting undermined. They're getting cut out of their jobs. They're getting layoffs, this and that. These long shifts, these very, poorly and weirdly staffed trains, cutting workforces, all of that stuff. There's just endless push for profit over people, and that, in that context, it is very, very clear and apparent to see that, President Joe Biden, he just kind of, frankly, parachuted in, did not really look into or investigate this issue at all. And, he could have done that. He could have, stuck with the railway workers in that sense, or he could have said, imposed a deal actually on the management. He could have actually imposed a deal and said, here is what we need to do. We are going to get these paid sick days. We're going to do the contract. We're going to do these negotiations. Even if he didn't do all of them, but did 75, 80% of them, he probably would have avoided any of this kind of brouhaha and this kind of resistance, because the railway workers would just support the deal in the first place, because it would have been a huge step up from the spot where they are now, and just Biden, frankly, completely let them down. So the course they ultimately chose was a very different one, though, because their sole imperative was preventing a strike where the people who run America's railroads have basic dignity or not. Confronted with the all-important question, which side are you on? Senior Democrats aligned themselves in the federal government with CEOs and shareholders while hanging workers out to dry, and no amount of partisan spin can alter or obscure that fact.
My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR content better. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bernie Sanders, he is moving towards, I think it's a very, very interesting situation. He is moving towards getting that Yemen War Powers Resolution floor vote as soon as next week. He's bringing it back, and it is a very, very good sign. This, of course, for those of you who don't remember, this was what was back in the Trump administration, was brought out by Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee twice, but I think Trump vetoed it both times, which is trying to stop the U.S. support for the Yemeni war, which Joe Biden kind of said he was going to do, but then skirted around and kind of resumed in all of his many failed attempts to kind of win back the support and love and trust of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But he still is back at it. So an agreement for a ceasefire in Yemen between the Saudi-led alliance and Houthis, who are backed by Iran, has expired, though both sides have tenuously maintained the peace. Backers of a war resolution say that a strong vote in the Senate in the lame duck will send a signal to Saudi Arabia that it does not have a free hand to restart hostilities, despite the Biden administration's more placating posture amid its hunt for lower oil prices. A war powers resolution is privileged in the Senate, which means that the sponsor of it can bring it to the floor for a vote without the need for approval by the chamber's leadership once a certain amount of time has elapsed. At this point, the resolution has ripened, and the one sponsored by Sanders is now ripe and ready to go. Asked whether Sanders expected to have the votes to pass the resolution, Sanders said, "I think we do, yes." So in 2019, Congress advanced a bipartisan version of the current Yemen War Powers Resolution, only to see it vetoed by President Donald J. Trump. Senator Bob Menendez and Lisa Murkowski, who both supported earlier versions of the bill, said they had not yet seen the draft text of the latest version of the resolution, and saying they would not commit to how they would vote. Wouldn't commit to how they would vote if Sanders brings resolution to the floor next week. I was not aware that it was on the docket next week, Murkowski told The Intercept, as it's not officially on the docket next week. I hadn't heard that. I guess we'll find out. I'm going to take a look at it. So Senator John Ossoff said he would definitely review it in full before a vote. So, they're still looking, they're still reviewing, they're perusing. Menendez, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, had previously called for a freeze in U.S. military support for Saudi Arabia, which is pretty significant, kind of in the Biden push for getting after Saudi Arabia on lower oil prices, talking tough, kind of in a unified way from the Democratic Party. As a chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I will not greenlight any operations with Riyadh until the kingdom reassesses its position with respect to the war in Ukraine. Enough is enough. Also in October, John Kirby, the White House National Security spokesperson, responded to Saudi Arabia's effort to jack up prices of gas by questioning the solidity of the relationship between the two countries, saying the administration is prepared to work with Congress, saying to think through what that relationship ought to look like going forward. So this is going to be a really remarkable chance where we finally have a president who isn't literally bought off by the Saudis to be in there when this war resolution goes through. This is going to be some really, really significant stuff if it can pass. And that's why, ultimately you got to have people like Bernie Sanders, because honestly, I don't know. I really don't know if Bernie Sanders had been there, if it had been someone like, it had been up to people like Bob Menendez, up to people like Lisa Murkowski, would they have been the ones to actually kind of stick their neck out and put this resolution forward? Saying what we do all know needs to happen, which is the kind of complete stop of Saudi aid, especially in the war in Yemen, where it's really humanitarian catastrophes happening. I don't know if that seems to be at the top of mind for some of these people. But, I think it does kind of show, how important it is for any kind of like semblance of morality in U.S. foreign policy that this is just quickly reevaluated here. Also in October, John Kirby, the White House's national security spokesperson, they talked pretty tough about that. He said President Biden is going to be willing to start to have those conversations right away, saying, I don't think this is anything that's going to have to wait or should wait, quite frankly, for much longer. The resolution gives Biden a post-fist bump opportunity to have that conversation. So it's going to be a really good opportunity for Biden to kind of turn back onto the making MBS a pariah, for not just the Jamal Khashoggi thing, but other things that he, really definitely promised in his address. On Wednesday, a coalition of groups pushing to end the war in Yemen plan to release a letter to Congress calling for a war powers vote during the lame duck. On Tuesday, the House Foreign Affairs Committee holds a hearing on the issues. The House version is sponsored by outgoing Representative Peter DeFazio of Oregon. It needs the support of Representative Jim McGovern of Massachusetts to get through the Rules Committee. McGovern is a co-sponsor of the resolution, and so is Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee. In the Senate, it's co-sponsored by Senator Dick Durbin, who is not just the chamber's number 2, but also serves as the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee that doles out the Pentagon funding. So that's going to be a very big deal as well. Next Wednesday, the House will be holding a public briefing chaired by Representative David Cicilline, a Democrat of Rhode Island, titled Public Members Briefing on Navigating the Political and Humanitarian Landscape in Yemen, a conversation with civil society on paths forward for Congress. The primary path forward for Congress is a war powers resolution, though advocates are pushing for restrictions on war making in the NDAA, which must pass by the end of the calendar year, which is the defense budget. So the resolution will also be put forward at a pretty complicated moment for Biden's relationship with Saudi Arabia. Though Saudi Arabia has used its oil exports as the cudgel to attack the current administration, which it views as opposed to its own economic interests and human rights record, relations began to thaw last month. Biden administration moved to grant sovereign immunity to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the lawsuit over journalist Jamal Khashoggi's death, angering advocates, so pretty much giving all hope of actually making him a pariah for MBS. But it does seem like, they're also moving in on, things like normalizing with Venezuela, paving the way, I think, for Chevron to begin drilling there, and kind of clearing up these backup options, which is, it's really remarkable. Again, just by continuing here, I think, to just speak out of both sides of his mouth on this, and I think with Saudi Arabia, ultimately, the thing has to be, believe it when you see it, really, because other than that, you are just not going to, for any president ever, Democrat, Republican, the idea that, policy towards Saudi Arabia changes in any significant way towards oppositional, is a thing that is, very, very rare. It's very, very hard to believe. It has not happened, really ever, I think, in the kingdom, ever since really the formation of the House of Saud, post-World War II, we have been their biggest supporters and allies. And I think that even as they've, repaid us in some pretty interesting ways, but, we've definitely reaped the rewards for it for quite a long time. So I think that's something to, definitely take account of as we consider all of this stuff. But, the House of Saud is, they're going to continue to, thrive and push their own interests. But, it does kind of finally seem like the position is all there. You got Biden, who pretty much has every other than, gas prices, which I think is a pretty big consideration, but 2 years away from the election, this would be the time to make a pretty big, pretty consistent, and pretty, consistent with the campaign promises, but pretty, impressive push. Only in that, it's really the bare minimum we should be doing with Saudi Arabia, but it still, nonetheless, would be a pretty impressive push considering where we've been in the past. But, if we were able to do that, I think that would be a first step, but still a very impressive step, considering past times, with what we've had with Saudi Arabia, just insane subservience from, Jared Kushner and Donald Trump. Jared Kushner literally bought off by them, and then really not too much better with Joe Biden as well. So Hassan Al-Tayyib, the legislative director for Middle East policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, said the War Powers Resolution could pressure Saudi Arabia by removing the possibility of more U.S. support for Riyadh and its partners to renew airstrikes in Yemen. Congress can play a constructive role to keep the pressure on the Saudis to negotiate an extension of the truce. The war between Russia and Ukraine, in which U.S. has been supporting Ukraine without a declaration of war, may complicate the politics of this resolution. Some of the language as applied to Yemen could arguably equally apply to the war in Ukraine, though the resolution specifies that only Yemen-related activity is covered. Congress is under no obligation to be consistent in their interpretation, and U.S. support of Ukraine is restricted to defensive operations inside the country's borders, whereas Saudi Arabia has been conducting its war inside Yemen. The resolution defines hostilities in a number of ways, including sharing intelligence for the this is what they have to stop doing under this resolution, including sharing intelligence for the purpose of enabling offensive coalition strikes and providing logistical support for offensive coalition strikes, including by providing maintenance or transferring spare parts to coalition member flying warplanes engaged in anti-Houthi bombings in Yemen. That definition is legally safe in Ukraine, and there is no evidence the U.S. is helping target Russia inside Russia's own borders, and any strikes of occupying forces can reasonably deemed defensive. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, has waged a relentless, though now paused bombing campaign inside Yemen, one which is impossible to call defensive because it long predated the Houthis' more recent returning of fire into Saudi Arabia. So it's obviously, a very, very kind of complicated situation. A lot of different dynamics going on with that. But it is going to be, very, very important to see, because really what we're seeing is just the one thing that's clear. You can get into how this war started, but there has been an insane amount of back and forth, a really kind of horrifying amount of back and forth, where we've seen just U.S.-supported Saudi drones end up in school buses, weddings, all these civilian targets. They're just frankly disproportionate to what the Houthi rebels are doing. So that is something that should be definitely taken into account whenever we're talking about the war in terms of stuff that the United States is enabling here. As we go to our last story. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the final stretch here today of our show. And we got some new reporting in from Al Jazeera, or an announcement, I should say, from them about what they are planning to do about Shireen Abu Akleh, following an investigation that, this is here in Common Dreams, following an investigation that Al Jazeera uncovered new evidence regarding the fatal shooting of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in May. The International News Network said on Tuesday that it's filed a lawsuit against the Israeli military forces at the International Criminal Court. Al Jazeera's legal team has conducted a full and detailed investigation into the case and unearthed new evidence based on several eyewitness accounts, the examination of multiple items of video footage, and forensic evidence pertaining to the case. The investigation reportedly showed that Abu Akleh and her colleagues were directly fired at by the Israeli occupation forces when they were covering the raid of a refugee camp in West Bank by the IOF on May 11th. The claim that Israeli authorities, by Israeli authorities, that Shireen was killed by mistake as an exchange of fire is completely unfounded. So Rodney Dixon, a lawyer for the network, told reporters that the ICC should identify the individuals responsible for Abu Akleh's killing. The rulings of the ICC stipulate that those responsible be investigated and held accountable. Otherwise, they bear the same responsibility as if they were the ones who opened fire. So the legal filing comes weeks after Israeli officials said that they would not cooperate with FBI investigation into the death of Abu Akleh, who was wearing a vest and helmet, identifying her as a member of the press when she was shot in the head. Israel said it's conducting an investigation which has found the origin of the bullet that killed the veteran journalist could not be determined because it was too damaged, suggesting that Palestinian forces still could have fired the bullet. Other investigations, though, including a U.S.-led forensic and ballistic probe and one by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, found that Israeli forces may have unintentionally fired the weapon that killed Abu Akleh. An independent force investigation by the Forensic Architecture in the UK and the Palestinian Human Rights Group, Al-Haq, concluded that the Israeli Defense Forces had intentionally killed the journalist. So, I think it's going to be really interesting. At least, it's very rare and unlikely the ICC will do anything about this, because I don't even know if they're Israel probably, anything human rights, Israel probably just runs away from. So I doubt they're even involved in these proceedings. They will definitely try their damnedest not to be involved in the best way that they can, try and stonewall anything that they do. Again, as because they just have too much respect for international democracy and the rule of law. But with that being said, we obviously can only hope for the best when it comes to the better understanding of who did this horrible crime, frankly, to Shireen Abu Akleh. With that being said, that's all we got for our show today. We'll be back on Thursday.